welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C., and this is our program being taped on the afternoon of Friday, February 1st. We're going to have Groundhog Day, a.k.a. Candlemas, in a couple of days. So here we are. Congress is back in session, and things are beginning to move faster. First of all, let's look at Syria, Israel, and Egypt. This is now an arc of crisis in its own right. First of all, a stunning development. Israel attacks Syria. Israel bombs Syria. Israel bombs at least a Syrian truck convoy going towards Lebanon, they claim. Now, I've been on that road. And it's just a road, and you go into the Bekaa Valley, and the Bekaa Valley is a kind of a resort more than anything. But the Israelis feel free to do this bombing, and the Israeli claim, right, sotto voce, not official, but the Israeli leak machine says, oh, those were Syrian trucks carrying poison gas and anti-aircraft missiles for Hezbollah. Well, poison gas, it can't be, because then you would know it, and the poison gas would be spreading enough so that it could be detected. Anti-aircraft missiles? Quite possible. Why not? If you were in Lebanon and you've had the experience of being bombed to hell by the Israelis repeatedly, you'd want to get those too. The Syrian account, or some Syrian accounts at least, are that this was a bombing of a research facility. Now, it is a breach of international peace and security. This is the stuff of which emergency meetings of the Security Council are made. Maybe there'll be one. There should be one. This is an act of naked aggression, because the Israelis do not get to decide what goes on between Syria and Lebanon. Sorry, two sovereign states, you can't do it short of war. And so if you want war, tell us. Some might say, this is the desperate demagogue Netanyahu forming his cabinet. In other words, he had some group of fanatics and lunatics on the extreme right reactionary aggressor fringe of Israeli politics. Maybe he needed to give them a token of his bellicose intensity, and therefore had to do this in order to nudge them into his congeries of a cabinet. Netanyahu will be more unstable from now on, because he's got more lunatics to cater to than the somewhat more limited group that he had before. And of course, Netanyahu himself is anything but a pillar of rationality. So it can easily be this. It can easily be Netanyahu setting the stage for what he wants 2013 to become. Netanyahu obviously wants 2013 to become the year of the great catastrophe in the Middle East. He wants to settle accounts with Iran. If he doesn't do it, by the end of the year, his political stock would sink, given the way he shot his mouth off about this now to the four winds for the past, 2 to 3 years, or perhaps more. Now, Russia has condemned this act of aggression. Iran has condemned this act of aggression, and we've also had Sheikh Nasrallah of Hezbollah condemning it, coming from the Israelis. Hillary Clinton, on her last day in office, because today, February 1st, 2013, is Hillary's swan song. She'll be appearing at the State Department with undoubtedly a self-serving tissue of lies. We'll get to her later, because she compels our attention. But she decided to use her last day in office to warn Russia and Iran that they have to stop supporting Syria. Well, again, this is the language of threats. No self-respecting country is going to go along with this. Now, we've got a collection of lunatics here in the United States who are trying to derive from the Israeli attack on Syria the following lesson. They say it shows that the Syrian air defenses are weak, and that it's therefore a good time for the U.S. to bomb Syria. Can you believe it? Have they learned nothing? These elites, We've got to form them into a brigade and send them to the front and teach them some lessons, right? The unreconstructed neocon warmongers and their submarines and their plants and so forth. So, time to attack Syria. Now, the lesson concerning the Syrian airspace, well, the argument is in 2007, in September, the Israelis were able to mount an air attack on something in northern Syria. Some say it was a nuclear plant of some kind, nuclear facility. I'm still very skeptical about that. But that's received wisdom here in the think tank circuit. But the Israelis were able to do that, and now they've been able to do this one. This one, I think it's fairly clear, is in the extreme border area. In other words, it's not so far from the frontier. And there are complex considerations that go into this. If you shoot down an Israeli airplane, the Israelis will obviously claim that the airplane was over Israeli airspace and that therefore they get to bomb you to hell. There's also another consideration, which is give the imperialists enough rope and they will hang themselves. In the following sense, Syrian media now point out what was always implicit, that the rebels in Syria are tools of the Israelis. Yes, indeed. Those death squads, those pompous Al-Qaeda creeps, those Nusra characters, and their misrule, they are objectively, as we used to say, objectively allies of the Israeli regime of Netanyahu. So that's going to make it harder politically for these Syrian rebels, mainly foreign death squads, as we've been reporting now for years on this program. Those foreign death squads are now under a cloud. They're tools of Netanyahu. They're Netanyahu's buddies. They're in a united front with Netanyahu. They're united in the struggle against Assad. So the Russian support of Syria remains strong. The Iranian commitment remains strong. And we should just recall the political defeat of the rebels is being consummated on the ground north of Aleppo because of their misrule. Imagine a civil administration staffed by these crazies. Imagine Al-Qaeda as the mayor and the city council, and Nusra as the province chief, and whatever it is. They cannot provide anything. No food, no fuel, no relief. They, kill people with reckless abandon. I'm sure they're doing their own executions and cutting off hands and acting out their barbarism. And people are turning against them. And that was the shock that went through Washington at the beginning of January. So that is now filtered down to the think tanks and the periodicals. There's a tendency here of the U.S. to sort of back off. At the same time, Russia and Iran hanging tough in support, and these feelings of defeatism and disorientation. The Turks, above all, have been sold a bill of goods. Erdogan, the quicker you understand that Obama duped you, the better off you will be. Time to dump Davutoglu, as has been mooted. Get him out of there and separate yourself from this crazy adventure. A couple of other implications on the French side. We'll be back with that in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Call your attention, as always, to Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net. You got to keep up with everything on Tarpley.net. This week, a couple of interesting things. A Press TV summary of what's going on in Syria. And on the French page, we'll have an interview I did with Radio Algérie, French service. So this is in French. I'll probably put something on the front page to let you know it's there. But that's an interview in French, about 10 or 15 minutes, unless it was further cut. That went on yesterday morning, that is to say Thursday morning. And the idea is simply the following. Russia and Iran are strongly supporting Assad. The United States has become lukewarm. The French, you can forget, because their poor array of capabilities and are completely committed to Mali. The French can't even run the Mali invasion. It's going to be the British coming in, and the U.S. has been in it for the whole time. It's going to be a NATO European Union show in Mali. So they have committed this cardinal mistake. They've committed the Hitler blunder. Don't attack the Soviet Union before you finish off the British. In this case, don't attack Algeria, Mali before you've finished off the Syrians. Because now the jihadis, the pool of potential fanatics, psychotics, double agents, and mercenaries in North Africa is now divided. They have two hearts beating. They have one to attack Assad, but that doesn't seem to go well. The casualties, the losses by the death squads are growing. The kill ratio favors the Syrian army lopsidedly. Citizens are now helping the army to eliminate these death squads. And, of course, we know that the guerrilla has to swim in the population like a fish in water, but if the population is hostile, the guerrillas will take it on the chin, and that's what's happening. Lavrov saying that Assad's departure is not possible. Iran saying that his attempts to overthrow Assad are a red line. Fabius conceding Assad will not fall in the near future. The king of Jordan also defeatist. Assad will not fall in the near future. So as one observer put it, the magic is turning against the magician. In other words, the death squad method, the Negroponte, Ford, Stevens approach to these things is showing its limits, especially the political limit, that when people come into that administration, they don't want to stay there. You see that in a muted form in Libya, right, with the rejection, right, the anti-death squad demonstrations and so forth. But in Syria, there's still a chance to stop them before they completely smash the state and wreck the country. There are even indications that Russia is discussing post-war reconstruction with Syria. In other words, looking beyond this episode with the death squad onslaught, get rid of them and get back to the important business of economic development. I can suggest one, right? When you go to Damascus, you see this railway station. There used to be a railway that would come down from Turkey, and it would go on to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. That's the one that the great Lawrence of Arabia of British imperialism destroyed. But you had a rail connection from Damascus to Haifa in what is now Israel, and then further south, Cairo and maybe Cairo, but in particular down to what is today Saudi Arabia, Hijaz. So that's the kind of thing you could get into. Imagine the political impact of a rail link that would begin to normalize the economic life of the region. That has got to be the way out of these things. So the French have taken Timbuktu, and Hollande is now going to play the role of what? Marshal Foch riding into Metz or Strasbourg at the end of World War I. Anyway, that's Hollande and his followers, right? His chorus of yes men who approve his military adventures. The analogy being bruited about here in Washington is that Mali is going to become the new Afghanistan in Africa, and Algeria is going to become Pakistan. It's going to be torn apart by the reflexes, or better yet, the NATO goal will be to push the Mali civil war into Algeria, get it across the border, in the same way that the Obama West Point speech of December 2009 aimed at shoving as much as possible of the Afghanistan internal civil war across that border and into Pakistan. So, not a pretty phenomenon. And of course, all of this goes on to Hillary Clinton's historical account. Let me just one last thing, is we got stories that there are circles in the Saudi Arabian royal family who are also getting cold feet, and they're trying to negotiate something with Assad. The other thing here that's very interesting is the role of Qatar, our dear friends, the Thani royals. We are told that some of the big backers of the Mali death squads, those Tuaregs and fundamentalists mixed in northern Mali, right, taking advantage of the fall of Gaddafi, taking advantage of the chaos in the Sahel and the Libyan arms depots that have been opened up to terrorists. Qatar has had all kinds of representatives in northern Mali, their airplanes, their weapons, their coordination, and so forth. So here we have a wonderful situation. In Syria, the United States is allied with the Thanis of Qatar, but in Mali, it's the U.S. and the French who are attacking the death squads controlled by Qatar and their friends. So what can we say? Go back to Obama, the postmodern coup, making of a Manchurian candidate, 5 years old now, some of the essays in there anyway. And the prediction is Africa becomes a battlefield. Africa has become a battlefield. And the goal of this is not what they say. It is to drive out the Chinese. It is to secure the oil of Libya, the oil of Algeria, and the uranium deposits of the Sahel, because underneath that sand, there is uranium. And not everybody is crazy. Not everybody has decided to shut down their nuclear reactors. Some of them intend to go ahead. The French have made a colossal investment, 60 or 70 reactors. They're going to need that uranium. So they think they can secure it and above all for themselves and keep the Chinese out. So there we have it. That's the strategic stuff in the Middle East. On the brink of a major war, sure. No doubt about it. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Keep up with everything at Tarpley.net and Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed, especially when the events come hot and heavy, when the big events begin to come down. Check Webster G. Tarpley once a day, twice a day to keep up with it. Let's look at Egypt for a minute. We just had the news that somebody threw a Molotov cocktail at Morsi's presidential palace in Cairo. The underlying cause of the present crisis is that Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood sold out to the International Monetary Fund, to Madame Lagarde, otherwise known as Madame Lagarce. Madame Lagarde and her crew were able to impose the usual genocidal austerity. They took the Egyptian economy, which was not good under Mubarak, although it's better than it is now under Mubarak, but it was certainly not good under Mubarak, and they were able to make it much worse. And the policy of the IMF, neoliberalism, free trade, free markets, the kind of thing we've heard from libertarians, Ron Paul, all the rest of this, take down all the subsidies, right? Going back to President Nasser, there are subsidies on bread, fuel, cooking oil. They've been chiseled and gouged over the years, but Morsi at the end of November said, okay, I'm doubling the price of gasoline. I'm hiking the sales tax brutally. That's a regressive tax. Remember, they had promised social justice. They said that the falahim, the peasants, and the workers would get a better deal, that it wouldn't be so corrupt, and you wouldn't have privileges for the rich and the super rich. Well, of course, how could the Muslim Brotherhood ever do that? The Muslim Brotherhood is the oligarchy. They are the rich lawyers, rich doctors, rich businessmen, rich professors and civil servants and people like this of various types. So that is what Morsi accepted, and he's finding Sadat, 40 years ago, tried to get rid of certain bread subsidies, and riots resulted. This is the third rail of Egyptian politics. Don't touch the subsidies. But since this government, and this is the difference, Mubarak was doing it slowly, grudgingly. Morsi is weaker. Morsi is a foreign puppet. He needs the $5 billion to distribute that as bribes to his wonderful spiritual religious friends in the Muslim Brotherhood. He's also got to buy off the Salafists, who also have their hands out in a wonderful posture. So there it is, right? The love of money is the root of all evil. Redex malorum est cupiditas. We've known it for a long time. So this is the cause. Now, notice the U.S. coverage says nothing, zero, nothing, nada about the role of the International Monetary Fund and their odious conditionalities. I'm telling you, that is the detonator. That is how the sort of swampy section between the Salafists and the Ikhwan on the one side and the liberal groups and the Nasserists, whom I support, on the other, that undecided swamp in the middle, they decided that Morsi is an enemy, and he is, because he's a tool of the International Monetary Fund. And don't tell me about your religious superiority, right? Show me your faith through your works. Let's see what you've done for the poor people of Egypt. In this case, he stabbed them in the back. So the general word in Cairo, we hear on NPR, that people are saying they're looking back now with nostalgia for Mubarak. 2 years after the fall of Mubarak, they're looking back with nostalgia. So Morsi has declared martial law, and this is very interesting. His opposition is now led by the National Salvation Front. And here we see two people that are widely known in the West, right? We have El-Baradei, who used to be the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and who put up some show of resistance against Mad Dog Bush the younger. He was sort of leaning on Europe and Russia, Japan, people that were not so gung-ho about the Iraq War. And then you've got Amr Moussa from the Arab League, whose record is wretched, right? He's part of the betrayal of Libya, among other things. And then you've got Hamdin Sabahi, and you can see them. When the three of them appear, there they are, and they're called the liberal opposition. Wait a minute. Hamdin Sabahi is not, repeat, not the liberal opposition. That is Nasserism. That says no to the theocrats and no to the Bonapartists. So no religious dictatorship, no military dictatorship. Instead, economic development, no austerity, no to the IMF, and therefore anti-imperialism. That's the winning recipe. It was the winning recipe in 1956 with the Suez Crisis that catapulted Nasser to become the hero of the Third World and therefore the target, right, of repeated wars with the Israelis being used as the spear point. And that is the winning recipe today. Economic development and anti-imperialism, especially the rejection of IMF conditionality and World Bank small is beautiful diktat. Small is not beautiful. Sabahi and what we're seeing, when you look at that trio, you get the impression right here from afar that those two weak sisters, Baradei and Moussa, are clinging to Sabahi, because remember, he's the guy who came in third in the presidential election. Now, suppose if we had a new presidential election, who would win? Looks to me like Morsi has turned himself into a minority president. The army candidate was always a nonentity, and that leaves Hamdin Sabahi. So I'm telling you, take the Nasserist road. This is for Egypt on the inside, but also here in the West. Time to give support and some publicity to Hamdin Sabahi, that third guy that you're now beginning to see on your television screens, and he needs to become much better known. And again, you can go back to that article in the New York Times in Christmas Day, December 25th. Hamdin Sabahi against Islamists and against free markets. This is populism. This is real development economics at work. I'm sure not perfect, but of the visible alternatives, it seems to me this is the one. Now, you can also see that Morsi fears Nasserism the most. The area of the Suez Canal, right, Port Said, Suez, Ismailia, that area, which is industrialized to some extent, it's a pole of development, probably the most economically viable, active, progressive area of the country. That's where Nasserism is strong. Those are the Hamdin Sabahi support areas. So where does Morsi put his martial law? Where does he impose his dictatorship? Right? It's kind of like Governor Snyder of Michigan, right, sending in little dictators to run the place. It's the Suez Canal area. It's Suez, it's Port Said, it's Ismailia. The areas of greatest Nasserist strength are the places that Morsi wants to crush under the jackboot of his police and whatever army he manages to get to do what he wants. So there it is. That is the growth of Nasserism. And what it also shows 2 years after the fact, needless to say, I warned you at the time. I remember going on Russia Today saying, this is not a revolution. This is a destabilization ordered from the U.S. Embassy. Ordered, as we later found out, by Samantha Power and by Michael McFaul. Michael McFaul has gone on to Moscow. He's butting his head up against the stone walls of the Kremlin. But those two, on the phone with Tantawi, saying, we want Mubarak out, 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 out. Don't listen to any other thing. This has now turned into the fraud that it always was. Thank God there's a viable alternative. So rally around Hamdin Sabahi. That's the way out of this crisis for Egypt. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. Now, we want to go out into the field. We're going to go to Los Angeles now. And today, of course, February 1st, we've been reporting. Today's the protest at the NAACP Image Awards, and one of the key leaders of that is Reverend Edward Pinkney. And Reverend Pinkney, of course, is one of the main leaders of the resistance in Michigan against the reactionary authoritarian Governor Snyder and his machinations trying to put Detroit under dictatorial rule, along with Benton Harbor, Flint, Pontiac, Ecorse, and others. So let's go to Los Angeles and see if we can get Reverend Pinkney on the line. I think he's probably at the site of the Image Awards or about to go there. And let's get a report. Reverend, are you there?
Yes, I am, and we are on the front line as you speak. I'm early because I want to get everybody organized to make sure everybody know what they have to do. They have the police out here. They're in full force. They got the streets blocked off, and they're saying there are certain places you can't be and there are certain places you can't stand. But I tell you, if it be enough people, we plan on putting a rush on them. So it's going to be exciting.
Okay, now let's remind everybody what the Image Awards are, who's getting the awards, and then let's get on then to your program, how you want to reform the NAACP. But first of all, who's on the red carpet? Who's at this
you got Steve Harvey. You got Steve Harvey. You got Denzel Washington. You got Freeman. You got Samuel L. Jackson, Jamie Foxx. You name it, they plan on being there, and we're right here waiting on them. See, they got a special spot for these celebrities to come in to enter the red carpet, and we're going to be right there so they can read our signs. So we got such signs as the NAACP supports the killing of black babies, and the NAACP are sellouts. The NAACP got to go, and we got a lot of signs. A lot of people. We're just waiting to see how this thing going to turn out.
So the guests are mainly Hollywood celebrities and other rich plutocrats. Is that about right?
You are absolutely correct.
Okay.
Now, I'm telling you, so one thing, Webster, this thing is really stopped boiling over. The tweeter, NAACP, stopped us from tweeting about the protest today. I guess they called Tweeter and told them that we was doing something derogatory, and he wanted us stopped immediately.
Oh, again, let's make sure we put your reform program up front. I think you want to get new leadership. You want to elect the people in a different way, and you want an audit. Can you give us an outline of that?
Absolutely. The first thing that we're demanding that Ben Jealous resign because of his policies more than anything else. He supports the soft drink company. He supports predator lenders. He supports Planned Parenthood and Defo Provera. He supports different things, and he's out of touch with our community. So we are asking him to resign and allow the membership to elect the next president. And we're moving forward with our plan. We have about maybe 50 ministers from around the country that's here, and unfortunately they didn't bring their congregation, but I'm satisfied.
So 50 ministers?
Yes.
Well, that's a remarkable turnout.
Absolutely.
And how about media? Did we have any local media or national media showing up?
Well, I spoke with the LA Times last night. They're going to do a story. I've been on the radio constantly since I've been here. I got here Wednesday, and I've been on the radio just about every single day.
Great. Now, let's also focus. This program will be broadcast starting on Saturday around 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time. So that gives people plenty of time to hear this program and go to your speaking engagement, which I believe is Saturday. You want to remind us when that is?
Absolutely. That's Saturday at the Maceto, located at 3655 South Grand. It starts at 5 p.m., and I will be the keynote speaker. And I'm really excited about that because what we have done so far since we have been here, I also spoke at UCLA and the University of Southern California in my 2 days here, and I want people to understand why we're doing what we're doing more than anything else. Because we're saying that the NAACP is out of touch with our community, and they support the killing of black babies. They support Planned Parenthood, and we are objecting to some of the things that they're doing.
Okay. Now, since we have you on the phone, is there any news on the Michigan front? Because we're always interested in this as well.
Well, absolutely. Today, the new emergency manager will take over the city of Benton Harbor. Joseph Harris is out as of today, February the 1st. He's no longer with the city of Benton Harbor. So
is that a success for you to get him out?
It's a success. But it's also a failure because they're bringing in another emergency manager. Our goal was to get him out, but also that they don't replace him with anybody else.
Right. And how about this Snyder had set up this investigatory committee to investigate Detroit as a prelude to putting a dictator in there, too?
Well, Detroit is going to get a dictator. We warned the city of Detroit, the residents, we spoke to them about it. See, the problem is they really looking at Benton Harbor, just Benton Harbor. But Detroit is the city that the governor wants. They want to have full control of the city of Detroit. And I'm going to guarantee you that they have an emergency manager.
And what kind of timeline do you think? How many weeks before that happens?
I would say I'm giving them until the 15th of March.
The Ides of March.
That's it.
Okay. So we've got to be ready to mobilize. In other words, we've got to spread the word on that and make sure everybody's looking for this to happen. And then when it happens, there's got to be some loud protests. And I know you'll be in the front line of those.
I will be right in the front line dealing with it. I will be there to support the city of Detroit and to make sure they understand how serious this matter is. A lot of people don't understand how serious this is. This is a very, very serious matter. And we're talking about a takeover of your community, a dictator coming in to dictate, and that's exactly what he's going to do, dictate to all the citizens. You will be powerless.
Well, maybe one last thing. We just heard you telling us these stars that have shown up, sort of on the.
Well, they haven't showed up yet, but they will be showing up.
Well, on the red carpet. But do you have any personalities like this on your side? Is anybody willing to protest, stand up to this system?
Well, we was hoping that we get a couple of the movie stars, but unfortunately they have not contacted me in reference to it. I was almost positive I was going to get a big name, maybe someone like Danny Glover or something like that, but unfortunately we have not made any contact with them since I've been here, and I'm going to say the answer to that probably is no.
Well, Hollywood is notoriously a very closed system, and it's organized into camps, and each camp, the left camp and the right-wing camp, they impose their discipline, and a reasonable position like this protest, I think, is not going to get much of a hearing among some of them, but maybe that will change.
Yeah, well, maybe some of them will show up. We don't know.
That's right.
That's right. We don't know, but we're looking forward to, even regardless whether they do or they don't, I think we have a pretty decent crowd, and I think we'll be pretty satisfied with the turnout, and I think we will accomplish our goal, which is the most important thing. And from here, we're going to Baltimore, Maryland, to the national headquarters and decide a big protest right there.
How about that? Welcome to World Crisis Radio, our second hour here, recording on February 1st. 2013. So that's the report from Reverend Pinckney and his website, BANCO, Banco, and you can keep up with his activities. He may have some films of that intervention. And, of course, as he says, for those of you here on the other coast, it's going to be Baltimore sometime soon. And this is, I think, very interesting front. Now, let's look at economics. Some signs of shakiness, that is the underlying failure of the first Obama regime to deal with the world economic recovery, to provide a recovery out of the world economic depression, I should say. This is now obvious, right? We've had the gross domestic product, a dubious measure, but there it is, going to zero growth in the last quarter of last year. Now, some people say that's Superstorm Sandy. Others might say it's the cuts in the defense budget. Let me just make a point about defense cuts right here at the beginning, because we're looking now at the significant $100 billion more in defense cuts on March 1st. It is irresponsible, foolish, and could be national suicide to simply cut the Pentagon budget and say, go home, you aerospace workers, you communications experts, and so forth. This, unfortunately, constitutes the only area, or some of the few areas, where the U.S. maintains some kind of modern technological potential. You cannot simply cut the defense budget. What you've got to do is turn defense contracts for military goods into civilian production. In other words, you need reconversion. You have got to make sure that whenever a weapons system is canceled or reduced, that there's a contract there to go into the space program, to go into the permanent colonization, exploration, permanent colonization, and industrial production on the moon. Various asteroids are now being looked at, and Mars, other nearby objects in the solar system. That's the goal. And, of course, modern fast rail, maglev rail, transportation, and modern energy production. In other words, you take all of the available defense production lines and you convert a very large part of them into these areas of civilian production. And by associating that effort with Russia, with Europe, with others who will be interested, Japan, most likely, you can then use that as a tool for international reconciliation using these peaceful means. In other words, the cooperation on the moon will begin to outweigh the idiotic squabble over some border or some other petty issue here on Earth. That's the future of humanity. If you don't do that, as Stephen Hawking says, if humanity does not go into space, we have no future. That is guaranteed. And for even left liberals, that might be an authoritative voice. The British cosmologist Stephen Hawking. He's right, beyond any doubt. So the word is that the defense cuts already implemented by Obama have helped to flatline the GDP in the last quarter of 2012. We've also got that the unemployment rate has now gone up again from 7.8 to 7.9%. These are not good signs. We've also got the crisis, the derivatives crisis, rolling on and on. Let's look at this for a second. The Monte dei Paschi di Siena. This is a really interesting case. The oldest bank in the world, by I think just about universal consensus, goes back to 1472. It goes back to the High Renaissance, 1472. And if you've ever been to Siena, the great square where the Palio is run, and so forth. And there we have the offices of the Monte dei Paschi di Siena. This is now bankrupt. And it's interesting to see what did it. A bank that could survive the War of the League of Cambrai, the 30 Years' War, the War of the Spanish Succession, the 7 Years' War, the Napoleonic Wars, the First World War, the Second World War, fascism. What would lay it low? Derivatives. Derivatives have done what 550 years almost of history could not do. Derivatives represent a new and toxic danger to the world. They are destroying institutions that stood up to just about everything. And let me also add, in this case, it's derivatives run by commies, derivatives run by the neo-communists, or some might say crypto-communists. They're not really very communist, but they're the old PCI, the old Italian Communist Party, dominating Siena as they dominate Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna and these places. At least historically they have. The foundation that controlled most of the shares of the Monte dei Paschi di Siena was dominated by Italian Communist Party, or then they call themselves Party of the Democratic Left, or now Democratic Party. Imagine that, Democratic Party. Camouflage getting deeper and deeper, but their greed, unfortunately, unfortunately not diminished. So, communists using derivatives. This is probably the worst combination of all time, and that has been enough to destroy the Monte dei Paschi di Siena. So Bersani, this neoliberal faker, this tax collector, I think is his mentality. His party, right, the Democratic Party, the wreckage of the old PCI, which was in some ways a respectable organization from certain points of view. This thing you have now, I'm afraid, not so much. And they've got the embarrassment of going into an election campaign with this thing around their neck. And of course, Monte dei Paschi becomes Monte di Pietà, the Monte di Pietà, the pawn shop. So that's where they're headed with this bank. Now, what that means, of course, is after the London whale and after all these other things, the entire system remains very unstable, and this could indeed happen. There are all these rumors now that there's going to be an effort made by an international banking cartel of oligarchs to try to drive up interest rates and so forth. So they may try to do that. But what this points to now is the need for an economic recovery. And here I would like to spend a little time talking about Professor Paul Krugman of Princeton University, columnist of the New York Times. He was on C-SPAN this week, and he was touting the paperback edition of his book, Stop This Depression Now. We have to give merit to Krugman for recognizing this is a depression. Yes, indeed. It is a world economic depression of unprecedented proportions. It includes the European crisis. It is now increasingly spread to China, India, Brazil. There is no place in the world that will be sheltered from this. And because it is now on a truly planetary scale, which it was not in the 1930s. In the 1930s, it was basically Europe, North America. That was it. Maybe a little bit of Japan, but not a whole lot. Now it is truly planetary. China, Brazil, other places, Russia, they're all part of this system. So it takes longer for the depression to work itself out. Even so, we're on the scale of the previous depression. We're now in 1933. We're at the point at which that depression reached its low point. So here we have Krugman at this point in the depression coming on C-SPAN and talking about a recovery program, another point of merit, but unfortunately falling short. And let me come back to that in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now let's continue with our discussion of Krugman's appearance on C-SPAN and also his implicitly the contents of his book, Stop This Depression Now. In other words, to recognize that there's a depression is a step up above the throng of quackademic economists. To recognize the need for a recovery program is yet another step up. So hats off to Krugman on those. But then watching his appearance on C-SPAN, and I tried to intervene, but unfortunately the lines were overloaded, as one can imagine. He has nothing to say about the role of the Federal Reserve. His conception of a recovery program is exclusively based on federal budget outlays, federal budget spending. The recovery, in his view, has to come out of the budget. The Treasury Department has to finance the budget. And he is correct in saying that there is no crisis of borrowing at this point. The Republican demagogy, of course, about deficits and debt is simply, as he correctly points out, a cover story for their desire to do what they always wanted to do, destroy the social safety net, wipe out Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, unemployment benefits, Head Start, WIC, and just about everything, food stamps, basically wipe out the New Deal. And they now feel that they can do this. They feel that their privileges are threatened in the Depression, that it's a great opportunity to secure their rule, for the next 50 to 100 years. So that's all fine. And he boasts that his Keynesian doctrine allowed him to predict that the austerity programs in Europe, in Greece, in Britain, and elsewhere, that these would fail. That's fine. Keynesian doctrine will get you that far. And the British, of course, are in a triple-dip recession, the biggest large economy that has gone into this extreme draconian austerity, sort of beyond Ron Paul killer cuts. That is the British, and they're now in their triple dip. So you can see where that gets you. And for the Greeks, of course, it's much worse, as we've documented over the past year. But the problem now is, how do you get the recovery in the United States? He seems to argue that nothing in the next 10 years could raise the question of some kind of barrier, crisis, difficulty in this. Of course, it's always interesting to see the lady interviewing him on C-SPAN. And of course, she's only heard a steady diet of oligarchs, left-ogarchs, right-ogarchs, center-garchs, all in favor of austerity. So she's shocked that somebody is not in favor of killer cuts. So another good thing from Krugman. But let's get down to the heart of the matter. Can you finance, and should you want to, try to finance a recovery on the federal budget alone? This goes back to the debate we had at the founding of the United Front Against Austerity in New York City on October 27th with a representative of the Jobs for All coalition. They wanted 35 million, 20 million jobs, I guess, 20 or 25 million, all on the federal budget, which would, mean, depending on the amount of capital investment per job, if any, that would mean $3 trillion in increased spending. But let's just look at our situation today. If we take the minimum necessary investment to upgrade the U.S. infrastructure, probably hard infrastructure primarily, right? The roads, railroads, bridges, energy facilities, water systems, canals, locks, ports, and so on. this is minimally $3 trillion. Now, suppose you simply add $3 trillion to the federal budget over the next couple of years. Krugman believes that this is no problem. If we had a comprehensive regulatory system, if we had the New Deal regulations in place, if we had a currency system with fixed parities, if we had the related stuff, the Glass-Steagall, the outlawing of interstate banking, and so forth, it's possible that one could go on with this for a while. But I think what Krugman, he does not understand, he doesn't give sufficient weight to the attack that can be generated. Because you look at some these countries in Europe, most of these countries in Europe were not in a crisis. They were not until they were attacked by the idea dinner that I documented on my website, written up in the Wall Street Journal, where the idea is attack these countries using credit default swaps through the London market and to attack their national bonds, their bonded debt, and then add in Standard & Poor's and Fitch and Moody's and the rest of them. So you get a coordinated attack on the public credit of these countries. Now, that is something that the presence of these derivatives, the credit default swap, is something that Keynes, he doesn't I don't think understand it or write about it, even though the fall of the Darmstädter Bank, the Donat Bank in Germany in the summer of 1931, that was caused by derivatives. That was the North German wool combing bank using derivatives on wool futures and things like this. So even then it was derivatives. Now, of course, the derivatives have grown far beyond that. So Krugman doesn't give sufficient weight to the possibilities of taking an increase in the U.S. bonded debt and using that as the pretext for an attack using credit default swaps, ratings agencies, and the rest of it. And also, the other interesting fact is that we've now got a large faction of libertarian madmen inside the United States who will eagerly become the tools of a foreign attack on U.S. bonds and the dollar. They'll lend themselves to any foreign attacker because they fundamentally want this to happen. They want to have a deflationary crash. The other thing is he does not reflect the politics of all this. In other words, I guess he admits he does not have a way to get this, what he recommends, which is, several trillion more, I guess, of spending on the federal budget. He doesn't have any way of getting that enacted through the Congress. So there is no political strategy to go with it. He basically says it won't happen for at least 2 years. Well, that's not good enough. Let me also point out before we get to the heart of the matter, Krugman is supportive of the Tobin tax, of the financial transfer tax, what is also called the Robin Hood tax, or what we call here, I think best of all, the Wall Street sales tax. But it's very lukewarm. It's tepid support. He says, well, this would be a little thing. The Europeans are doing it. We can do it too. It won't make that much difference. I beg to differ. This is the key measure to redress the balance in the entire U.S. economy and get the country back to tangible physical commodity manufacturing production and away from pure speculation. It's absolutely crucial, and it should be 1%. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So, discussing the positive and negative features of Krugman on C-SPAN in his book, Stop This Depression, now available in paperback. He is completely focused on the Treasury and the federal budget. All recovery spending must occur there, in his view, and he simply dismisses the dangers this might create. And again, I would agree, in an ideal world, you might be able to go on doing this for 10 years, but that's not what we have. We have foreign speculators. We have, above all, the British, but we've also got this faction inside the United States that would be eager to pitch the country into a terrible crisis using credit default swaps and the ratings agencies, which they clearly tend to dominate. And, the attempts to put them in jail by Judge Ruggiero and others so far haven't put these people in jail. But what about the Federal Reserve? That's the interesting thing with Krugman is there's not a word about the Federal Reserve. The greatest engine of credit generation, potentially, the Federal Reserve, which he does not mention. We're told that at the height of the crisis in 2009, the Federal Reserve was ready with $27 trillion of various kinds of stimulus, largely credit stimulus, for zombie banks, hedge fund hyenas, money market funds, primary dealers of federal bonds, and so forth. In other words, Krugman is able to see a fiscal stimulus. This is what he wants fiscal stimulus more than anything. He wants deficit spending. That would be a fiscal stimulus. Federal government spends more than it takes in, creates aggregate demand, gets things going. The problem is that this has been tried. Now, he would argue that the stimulus plus supplemental, about $1.1 trillion or $1.2 trillion, those were too small. And indeed, they were too small. And too much was taken up in tax cuts. I would agree with that, too. But the problem with that is this acts, unfortunately, largely in the area of consumer spending. It's largely to maintain the employment of police, firemen, teachers, state workers, federal government workers, along with unemployment benefits extended to 99 weeks, and so forth. These are all good things, but they do not create a self-sustaining recovery. They act primarily in the area of consumer demand, which is unfortunately the two-thirds of the U.S. economy or more, but they don't act on the area of capital goods production, modern, high technology, high energy density, high value-added capital goods. Those don't get stimulated sufficiently by that. You look at the stimulus, the highway bill was, $50 billion. The whole hard infrastructure, maybe $100 billion, $150 billion at the most. That's not enough. It's especially not enough when you've got the zombie banks sitting there with masses of bankrupt-kited derivatives that absorb all of their attention. They don't lend anything. So the private sector lending is basically it's very reduced, practically nothing. So we got fiscal stimulus. That's where Krugman wants to put everything. There's also monetary stimulus, right? When you essentially increase the money supply. This is slightly different. This is what the Federal Reserve does. This is Bernanke. So he inflates, right? He wants to print money. He wants to have easy money, lower the discount rate, lower the interest rates, lower the Fed funds rates. This Krugman doesn't talk about so much because this basically been hot money. This puts downward pressure on the dollar, sends the euro up and the yen up to some extent, and that doesn't work either because it adds to speculation, and the zombie banks and their derivatives absorb it all. So Krugman is absolutely in favor of fiscal stimulus. Monetary stimulus he's not so interested in. But then what about credit stimulus? There's a third kind of stimulus, Professor. That's a credit stimulus. And that is the majority of the $27 trillion that Bernanke was putting out. The line of credit that the Federal Reserve under Bernanke was willing and able and eager to extend to zombie banks, including foreign zombie banks, $27 trillion. And you remember what these were. The Term Auction Facility, the TAF, the TALF, the Primary Dealer Credit Facility, and on, right? There's a group of about 6 of them. The Money Market Fund Credit Facility, on and on and on. Why not change gears? Why not say, maybe those will, some of them have quieted down already, but what we need now is a credit facility for infrastructure. We need an infrastructure credit facility. We need a credit facility to rebuild the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut metropolitan area. And here we can get the same credit conditions that zombie banks would get because these are safer investments. You lend money to a zombie bank that's up to its neck in derivatives, and you accept their paper as collateral? That's not very sound. But if you rebuild the Port of New York, if you build that tunnel under the Hudson River if you rebuild the national passenger freight and commuter rail system of the United States. There's a valuable collateral. You can say that's collateral. That is going to be okay. 100-year bonds, century bonds, following the luminous example of Caltech in recent months, and 0% coupon. The theoretical basis is clear. It is the speech given by Wilhelm Lautenbach to the Friedrich List Society in Berlin in September 1931 after the crash of the British pound. He recommended several billion Reichsmarks to be made available for public works, meaning roads, railroads, bridges, telecommunications. And that was, if you will, a government official with a right-wing coloration. At the same time, the German trade unions with the Tarnow-Bada-Wojtyński plan, you can read about this in the works of Ludwig Holtfrerich, has done the best job on this. And here we find the unions saying the same thing. We want the German Reichsbank, the central bank, has to cough up 2, 3, 4 billion. That was called today. It would be trillion in credit to allow the rebuilding of infrastructure. And again, the simple the bottom line on that is if that had been done in 1931-32, and if the unemployment in Germany had been absorbed during 1932, you wouldn't have had Hitler in 1933. So the stakes of this are rather high, and we shouldn't kid ourselves that we are somehow immune to that kind of tragic outcome anywhere in the world today. So I would ask Professor Krugman, what do you think about the role of the Federal Reserve? Why shouldn't the Federal Reserve contribute to this? And the other important point about this is politically feasible. This can be done. And it takes the form of Obama calling Bernanke to the White House, sitting him down, and reading off his teleprompter if necessary. I'd be glad to write the speech for him. Obama telling Bernanke, Ben, the country needs you. After you created all of those credit facilities for zombie bankers only and for financial parasites only, we need you now to create a credit facility. If you want to do their job on infrastructure, it might be $3 trillion to start with. You can start with $1 trillion. You can start with any sum in this order of magnitude, right? In the trillions of dollars, 0% coupon and long-term 150 to 100-year preferable on these things because you want to build them to last that long, right? That's implicit, right? You want to give high-quality construction so it lasts. And you're going to start that. And it takes the form of then calling on the states to issue bonds and buying those bonds. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio, our concluding segment here in the program of February 1st, as we're looking forward to a couple of things. Let's just mention those on the way here. March 1st, the sequester. My answer to the sequester is cancel it, call it off, get a majority vote, get Republicans who don't want to cut defense, get Democrats who don't want to destroy Head Start and other important programs. Don't cut the National Institutes for Health. This will throw the Washington area into a recession. No good can be done in this regard. So concerning the sequester on March 1st, call it off. Forget it. The defense spending requires investments to retool, reconvert for space and transport. You can't just do it this way, and you certainly don't want to cut these important programs of research and related things. So bipartisan consensus, cut the Tea Party fanatics, cut the budget lunatics, the austerity ghouls out. A simple centrist majority reaching, I think, into the far left, unless they're completely crazed on these defense cuts, should be enough to just call it off. Then we've got the budget on the 27th of March. Well, for that, we need the Wall Street sales tax. It's now in the air. We've got DeFazio Harkin, we've got Bernie Sanders, we've got Ed Schultz talking about it, we got the European Union, 11 countries going for a Wall Street sales tax in their own terms. So we need all that. And then May 1st, we've got the the new default deadline with lunatics like Ted Cruz, boy, an unctuous snake oil salesman, if there ever was one. It looks like he bathes in snake oil every night. The smiling face of the hypocrite. He seems to be a character out of an embodiment of hypocrisy out of Dante's Inferno. Wouldn't buy a used car from Ted Cruz. Anyway, those guys have got to be checkmated, and the answer is the 14th Amendment, that, sorry, boys, default is illegal. We can't default. We must maintain the obligations of the United States. We're a sovereign country. We can print money. We can pay. There you have it. And default is illegal. The debt ceiling is unconstitutional. And get Obama to do that. He doesn't want to do it because he wants to use the Republicans as an excuse to get these killer cuts. But now going back to Krugman, the basic position is he's all in favor of fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus he says less about, of credit stimulus by forcing the Federal Reserve to do these things. He says nothing at all. And therefore, he deprives himself of the game changer, the thing that would transform this entire situation. We need to make the transition from federal spending, from federal borrowing and federal spending, the current thing. The Federal Reserve, the U.S. Treasury has to borrow money from zombie banks, which are themselves creatures of the U.S. government. In other words, they're only there because the U.S. government has propped them up and continues to prop them up. And the prop-up is we're now 4 years into the formal too-big-to-fail policy. The Geithner too-big-to-fail policy is now 4 years old. Geithner is leaving. And what are the results we have? The zombie banks sit there. They fester. They are choked with masses of bankrupt, toxic derivatives. They are toxic waste sites, right? The Wall Street is now the love canal of the banking system, right, full of toxic waste and old, chemicals that are deadly. So that's the result. We need to get around this, and it's also clear that those zombie banks, under no circumstances, can be able to finance a recovery. They just can't because they have to use their resources for speculation, the London whale, the LIBOR scandal, and so forth. So the federal treasury is already heavily burdened. We should be thinking about increasing food stamp payments from $1.50 maybe to a regal, opulent $2 or $2.50 per person per meal, and we should think about that open-ended unemployment benefit and some other things. Stop chiseling Medicare, stop chiseling Medicaid and Social Security, as Obama wants to do. But all of that will be burden enough for the federal treasury. So let's look beyond fiscal stimulus. Let's look beyond monetary stimulus, the hot money that Bernanke likes to dish out. Let's look at credit stimulus. And again, if it could be the term auction facility, the TAF, the TALF, the primary dealer credit facility, the money market fund credit facility. Let's now have the infrastructure facility, the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut rebuilding facility. And again, the method simply is Bernanke puts out a tender offer. He says to governors, to cities, to counties, to authorities, Port Authority, and so forth, I'm now putting out a tender offer. I'm announcing my willingness to buy $3 trillion. Why not get it all going at once? $3 trillion of bonds that you will issue, you states. You're going to be borrowing money from the Fed, not the federal government, not the U.S. Treasury borrowing money from any zombie bank or from anybody. It's the nationalized, or at least in this case, partially nationalized window, at least that window will be nationalized, putting out a credit stimulus through the states, through the other regional local governments, to begin this huge task of rebuilding the entire infrastructure. And this can be done politically any time you want. You can't sit there like Krugman and say, there is no perspective. We can't do it. It will never happen. That's not good enough. you can't throw an entire generation on the junk heap. If you do, they may come back in brown shirts or black shirts or some modern equivalent of that. So I think the political weakness of Krugman's argument is he doesn't have a plan to get anything enacted, whereas I do. This is something that could be done. Right now, Bernanke dances to the tune that is given to him by Blankfein, by Diamond, by Pandit the Bandit, or now his successor, and all these people. So, how did the Federal Reserve decide that they would open the term auction facility, the TAF, the TALF, and these other ones, this toxic alphabet soup that he put out in 2008, 2009? It's because the banks demanded it. Remember Kramer telling Bernanke he understood nothing. Well, that was pressure on Bernanke, and what they wanted was to create these facilities. So he did it. The president could do this. A large group in Congress could conceivably do it. They could pass a law over Obama's veto. This is conceivable. This is not what I think is likely, but that could be done too. Or you could have a mass movement doing it. But the easiest way is to convince Obama, turn on your magic teleprompter, Barkey, and start reading this. You can put it on cards the way Reagan did it. You get Bernanke in front of you, you read him this text, you give him a copy, and you say, we thank you, Chairman Bernanke, for your public-spirited willingness to go beyond the usual methods of lending. Remember, in the course of these credit facilities, they were willing to take all kinds of junk as collateral. They were willing to take, ultimately, the commercial paper of zombie banks that were bankrupt. They were too big to fail, but they were insolvent by any reasonable technical standard, but they still took that as collateral. That's not what we're proposing at all. These are safe investments. These are good investments. You're gonna have collateral in the form of the wonderful highway system, the fast rail. Those will be owned by the states and the people, but they're collateralized. In other words, if a default occurs, then they become collateral. Then the Federal Reserve could get hold of them. We don't want that to happen. So you get the idea. It can be done. And last thing is, this busts the flank of the right-wingers because it can be portrayed what it is. It's an attack on the existing Federal Reserve. It basically says if you're tired of the way the Federal Reserve has been operating, here's an attack on Bernanke and what he stands for, and we're trying to bring this back under the control of the people. So that's what I would recommend. That's what people, I would say, should tell Krugman. And we'll see you next week on World Crisis Radio.